Sure, thank you. So I'm Shane Miner, and I'm going to talk about our archive. We at WGBH produce about 35 to 40% of the national content that PBS airs during prime time. So we produce shows like Nova, Antiques Roadshow, Frontline, Masterpiece, and American Experience. And so we're large for a public media company. We have about 850 full-time employees, which means we have like 700 people making content all the time. So we have a lot of content to store. Our current workflow is a little challenging, or our previous workflow was a little challenging. We would have internal and external producers who would arrive with hard drives and tapes. They would ingest them into the edit suite, and then they would actually do a FileMaker database of all this metadata for the media. Yep. And then the edit would finish, and all of that would be delivered to our archive team, and they would go through this complicated archive prep process where they would take all the FileMaker metadata and associate it with all the media. Then they would, and that was kind of the curation phase, then they would write that to 2 LTO tapes, put one in a vault, and send one off-site. And that's, it's kind of time-consuming, definitely very people-centric, and just kind of a long process. So yes, requesting media from our archive takes anywhere from 22 to 72 hours, 24 to 72 hours, because every business day at 2 o'clock, someone walks into the archive and pulls a tape, and you have to request it before 2 o'clock in order to get that. Actually, because of the kind of increased amount of content both our producers are shooting and the increased size of the content, because of 4K, et cetera, our archives team is actually falling behind the process of ingesting. So a show, once it goes to air, gets passed off to the archives team, could sit for a month or two before it's actually getting processed by that team, and that time keeps increasing, which is a real problem for us. Definitely it's a super manual process because someone actually physically takes a tape and puts it in a vault, which is a little difficult. And media is just everywhere. Because producers are worried about that media on tape, they keep the hard drive under their desk, so there's hard drives hidden all over the place. I don't like the disaster recovery model in this solution, so yes, we have a tape off-site, and yes, you could go get it, but the length of time it would take to do that grows over and over and over again, so there's a real problem there. And the search side is really broken. Because that metadata comes in FileMaker and doesn't get attached till the very end, you actually can't search media while you're in the edit, right? None of that metadata is meaningful to you. In fact, so much so that we would see teams that would rebuy stock footage instead of trying to find it in the archive because it was faster. Yeah, it was cheap enough that they didn't care, but the cost of all that spend was actually pretty large. So we wanted to make the workflow much more quick, right? Retrieve media in minutes, not days. We needed a better search. We needed that search to be more meaningful in both the edit and right after the edit. We really had the goal of trying to reduce our dependence on a MAM. So we're looking at object storage as being an integral replacement of one behemoth MAM system. And that's about how the metadata is stored in objects. And it kind of removes the vendor lock that I think most media companies suffer in the MAM space. They kind of get stuck with a MAM and the MAM kind of owns them. Realistic and achievable disaster recovery. So all we have to do is turn on a bucket policy on a Cloudian bucket, and it mirrors to Amazon. That's one software configuration on day one, and then my team never does anything ever again, and we automatically have a second copy off-site. No additional software, no licensing, it's just built into the product. And obviously what we wanted to do was plan for the future and for change. We're virtualizing our edits all the time, we're looking at Cloud Edit all the time. We want to be able to pivot quickly when the moment comes for that to happen. So we looked at a series of vendors, or a series of options in the space from a storage perspective. Obviously, we looked at the sort of traditional NAS and SAN. We didn't like the lack of scalability. We didn't like the integration to the cloud. The data protection side was always another software layer, so always a problem there. And the limited scale. In the end, you can't have a truly limitless SAN or NAS. Sorry.
Face that way.
And we also looked at the cloud, just the cloud alone, and we ran into some problems with the math. We're looking at moving from, well, the archive all of a sudden has become enormous because we have the solution in place. And it's a really active archive, so we knew we'd be pulling data really frequently. And in the cloud-only model, we ended up with lots and lots of egress charges from Amazon, and that drove up the cost of the solution, right? We also needed then to store it on S3 instead of on Glacier, so the cost of the storage was higher. But by using kind of a hybrid model, we can store a copy locally, have a second copy directly in Glacier, have a really, really low cost on Amazon, and not have the retrieve cost when we need to pull. And so that's, when we got to it, looking at Object Store felt like the right choice. And that was partly the limitless scalability, right? We know that our producers are going to just have more and more content. It's going to be bigger and bigger. File sizes are going to be enormous. We have to be ready to handle that. But we also really love the idea of embedding metadata into the video file. And that was a really essential piece for us, because that's how we can get to searchability more quickly and eliminate some need around the MAM. So because an object isn't just a video file, it's a video file plus metadata, it's one object, which means that you search the objects and you can actually get meaningful search results just from the storage system, which is was a great piece. I'll say that the one knock for object storage is a lot of times vendors are integrating to AWS, and you just have to ask them to also integrate to any other endpoint, because Cloudian mirrors the S3 API. You can actually, so we did this with Telestream. Telestream will push a file to AWS, but we asked them to change the code so that we could change the endpoint and push to our local AWS instead, and they released it in like one minor revision, so we had the feature pretty quickly. But it is a thing that we have to ask vendors for on a regular basis. So I'm going to try over here. Let's see if this works. So this is the concept of an object. Again, what I was talking about with the media itself being connected to the metadata. So you're storing a thing that is actually searchable and self-describing, right? You don't need a database to store metadata anymore. It's all part of the object. And that was really, really compelling from our perspective. So what we ended up implementing is an on-premise storage of 3 petabytes now. It takes up 15 units of rack space. It's 90% less than the tape library. We have an SL8500, so 3,500 tape LTO library, and that takes up 10% of that space for the same storage amount. We get immediately the disaster recovery, so with a simple bucket policy, all of a sudden all of our media is stored in AWS as well, and we're doing that directly to Glacier, so the cost is ridiculously low, and we rarely have pull costs around it because we all have a second copy on site. We can like capacity on-demand tier to Amazon. So one of the options is that a bucket exists locally and has an AWS S3 bucket behind it. People can just fill it up, and as it gets full locally, it just moves everything off to Amazon and deletes the local copy. So we can scale up really quickly when we need to. But it all looks like the same share to all of our users. They don't have any idea what's going on in that space. So the new workflow allows sort of the ingest phase to include the metadata, because the metadata can be meaningfully associated with the objects. And then it all sits on Cloudian locally. We can tier off to Amazon. We do tier off to Glacier for the disaster recovery. We can do the S3 for the extra capacity. But now the edit and archive curation can all start happening at the same time. So instead of show gets finished and handed off to archive, it's archive is adding metadata while the show is editing, which means that they can then find more meaningful search results just in their day-to-day operation. We also use Sony C in the cloud space for a lot of our pre-production process, and then that's how we end up selling media, right? So we push it to Sony C to be shared with the folks who buy from us. So the real value, the really amazing search side is, this is what our old search looked like, right? We actually pulled tapes off shelves. We read the things that were on the sides of the tapes to make sure we had the right tapes. And now we have a web-based interface that does all that for us. And this is, so it's been very popular in the IT industry for a long time, but less so in the media space. The idea of breaking apart big applications into small services, right? So instead of having a monolithic MAM that does everything for you, you have small, lightweight web interfaces that are easy to change and update and easy to add features to really quickly, instead of sort of needing the next release of the MAM software to happen. It's the idea of microservices. And we think we can do the same. We can microservice the MAM because all the metadata is now stored as part of the object. You don't need to interact with the vendor's API, you just need to understand how an object is built. Okay, so what that means for us is now, instead of search only happening here, after the archive team finishes curating all the content, search can happen at the very beginning. It can happen all the time. And that means that we have material that we sell, we sell stock. We have stock sales team, right? And they sell media after the fact. If they can't search it, if they can't sell it till it arrives here, we've lost value of that media. If we do a current events show and they have some footage of a president doing something, that's not, the sale to life of that object is very short, right? It's got to sell quickly or else it's not going to be of any value. And so by connecting that to earlier in the process, we actually can drive more revenue as an organization. Yeah, so definitely we feel like we've significantly enhanced the workflow. There's no question that our producers are now quickly putting stuff into that archives bucket and not holding on the way they used to because they can still see it, they can still access that media later on. We can turn around media requests much more quickly. Now users click to download a file instead of putting in a request and waiting for 24 to 72 hours. The parallel groups has been really valuable because the archives team actually adds meaningful metadata to a video, and now the team who's in the edit can actually see that and can find media that they weren't sure that they had before. And the space savings was huge, right? To go from what was 17 rack units down to like half of a rack unit has been a big deal. So definitely what we're really interested in next is the tools that, we're going to primarily use Amazon, but Amazon Web Services has a recognition application that you can use that will actually identify things like this person is 96% smiling and 86% happy. He 100% has a mustache, right? But that metadata can now be automatically generated on Amazon. Because a copy sits with Amazon right away, you can automate all of the creation of that metadata, write it back to the object, and all of a sudden it becomes searchable. And that's with no people involved, right? Usually the labor intensiveness of metadata addition to video can be a problem. This eliminates all that problem. It automates it for you. And they have a whole slew of text and video, audio transcription. They can identify like mountain bike, mountain, hill, sort of all the things you'd expect, as well as famous people. So famous facial recognition is built in as well. Yeah, so the one problem we did have was that we started with a petabyte, and we brought up the petabyte, people started using it, and then within a few weeks I had a request for 10 petabytes because it was quickly going to become an overwhelming used device in our facility. We've gotten up to 3 petabytes now. We actually had to make 2 purchases in the same year, which is hysterical for us. But there's no question that all of a sudden all this media is coming out of the woodwork because people trust that we're going to be able to store it and make it searchable for them. And so all those hard drives under desks, people are showing up and saying, hey, can I move this over? And we're trying to make that happen as quickly as we can. But we got to get to 10 petabytes first before I can take all the hard drives. So definitely, one of our, in terms of lessons learned, we definitely saw the ROI really quickly, right? So it was clear that it would have been advantageous for us to start soon and get it done quickly, because all of a sudden our stock sales team was able to sell more things, right? We actually were making money quickly. It was a little difficult to talk to production teams about how to change their process. Inertia is a difficult thing to overcome, and they've been archiving media in a particular way with the archives department for years and years and years. So changing that workflow took a lot of negotiating. Definitely what we found is that if we could provide a little bit of a view into a better solution, they would quickly adopt. So they got very interested once we could demonstrate some wins, and so finding some easy wins was actually key to that. Yeah, and I would just say we're better positioned for our future, right? There's no question that our archive is going to be in a better place between Cloudian and AWS than it was on 2 physical LTO tapes, both stored in the Boston area. So that's been a big win for us. Thank you very much.